Welcome to koam-presents, a podcast produced by KOAM News Now and the 4 states' most watched news team.
I chose to invest money into a renewable energy resource like solar panels, so that I can sleep at night knowing that I am doing my part to create a cleaner earth for my grandchildren. CDL made that decision easier by educating me on how I can save money and how renewable energy can save the environment. Because what I do today matters tomorrow. Call CDL today to see how you can make a difference.
Welcome back again, guys. Episode 5. We're hanging out at JB's again. The one and only. Opening up to be determined, but obviously you have to come check them out. They're on Main Street in Joplin, 1210. And it's a cool place, very family friendly, no non-alcoholic drinks, pizza. We were looking at their pizza menu, looks really good. This weekend, they're going to have Randall Shreves, and it's going to be an open house. So you don't even have to pay the membership fee. You can come check it out from 7 p.m. to 11 p.m. Down here on Main Street in Joplin. But happy 4th of July, or belated 4th of July.
Same to you. Hope you stayed cool.
Oh,
Had
gosh,
fun?
we tried. Did some kayaking, shoot some fireworks, all the above.
Sounds good.
Didn't get hurt too bad,
No ER visits.
Yeah, exactly.
Good for you.
Yeah.
Nice.
And today we're going to be talking about investigative reports, which I would say, that's the bread and butter, if you will, of journalists and reports. A lot of it is getting those answers that the community needs to know, that kind of stuff. Is that how you've always seen it?
Yeah, the strict definition of an investigative report is a little bit fluid, but yeah, I would say you've hit part of it, certainly. It's an in-depth report. Usually, in our case, it's a multi-part report.
Yeah.
And it requires a lot of legwork, sometimes exposing something that is not previously known or is not well known.
So it's not always like a very prevalent issue. It could be something.
Well, it could be, but sometimes it's kind of peeling back some layers of the onion and finding the cause or the core issue.
Yeah. Do you have some favorites, like kind of over the year that you're like, wow, this one, whether it maybe made a bigger impact or just stuck out to you?
In anticipation of this, I jotted down a few that I've done, a handful. Dozen. I've done many.
Yeah,
and
I can imagine.
As far as favorite, by the way, the answer is no, because it seems like whenever I'm working on a story at that time, that one feels like my favorite. But there are some that stick out. Certainly, one of them, we got just a nugget of tip. Sort of, someone told us that truck drivers were avoiding a particular way station on Interstate 44 in Joplin, eastbound, and they were doing that by taking this smaller road, a rural road down south of Joplin, kind of up through Seneca Reddings Mill area. And this was an issue for people who live there because the road wasn't equipped to handle that. And so it was suffering more wear and tear than it would otherwise. And they also thought it was dangerous. And when we checked some of the records, checked with the Highway Patrol, saw that there was a disproportionate number of accidents on this bit of road.
Really?
This road was windy and had hills and just wasn't equipped really to handle a lot of semi-traffic. And if people tried to pass here, that was an issue. And so to find out if this was a real issue, we started following some semi-trucks.
As they would get around while they're driving? Oh.
Well, specifically as they got off of Interstate 44, which is the Will Rogers Turnpike in Oklahoma, and then would come into Missouri. And most of them, of course, would stay on the interstate. That's the direct route. Time is money. It's the fast route. But we would find trucks that would get off this particular exit at Miami, Oklahoma. And so we followed them. We thought, where are they going? And time and again, they were getting back on the interstate. They were just getting back on the other side of the way station. It appeared that they were maybe trying to avoid the way station. Maybe they weren't meeting weight requirements. We followed one particular truck then, and we wanted to just go until it stopped. We thought it's got to stop someplace. And fortunately for us, the guy stopped in Joplin, and we kept the camera rolling. And I just walked up with the camera rolling and said, why did you take that route to get here when he could have just taken the interstate. He didn't want to talk to us.
I was going to imagine you just walking.
We talked to the highway patrol, and they would sometimes set up mobile way stations. They were aware of this problem, and they set up one on this particular route to try to catch drivers doing this. And the problem with that, you catch some drivers, but they, of course, are in communication with each other with their radios.
Oh, they're letting them know.
So it doesn't take long. And we can hear it on the scanner, and they're telling other drivers, careful, mobile way station. And one driver in particular, we got word, had pulled off down south of where we were and was apparently trying to unload some grain from a grain truck. They were dumping it on the side of the road. And as they were doing that, the truck tipped over onto its side. And we did the same thing. We went down there with our cameras rolling. We started asking them, why did you do this? Didn't want to talk to us. But we talked to some drivers at the way station who had stopped, and they were aware of this. They said it was an open secret that they would do this. And they were glad to see us doing something about it, because the truck drivers who were following the rules wanted everybody else to follow the rules. Mm-hmm. Did another one that was called Out of the Way, by the way, WEIGH. One we called Tired Truckers. Is about truck drivers who would maybe cheat on their log reports, wouldn't take the breaks that they were supposed to. And
I know that's a strict thing from what I've seen.
And the rules have changed. They've been amended a bit over the years, and now in this age of GPS, it's easier to keep track of that sort of thing. But at this time, it was just up to their logbooks to document whether they were sleeping when they were supposed to, or at least taking a break, or whether they were driving for 20 hours straight. And we found one woman whose husband had died in a crash involving a truck driver. And they were claiming it's because this guy hadn't slept. And the guy's logbooks showed that he had, but we were able to get hold of some documentation from when he had passed through toll stations on the interstate. And those are time stamped. So we could compare that to his logbook. And we knew that he had passed, point A at this time, and that he had passed point B at this time. And supposedly in between the two, he had taken a 2-hour break. So we just did the math. It's simple to determine speed. It's, middle school math. You divide distance by time, you get the speed. Yeah. And it was clear that he either hadn't taken the break or he was driving an impossible speed. He would have had to average like 120 miles an hour.
Yeah, something wasn't adding up.
Right. And again, truck drivers were glad we did this story, those that we heard back from, because those who were following the rules that were having to compete with those who weren't. And it was dangerous for everybody.
In an instance like that, is that something that, is the case already done at that point? Was this investigative while the case was still unfolding?
That case was unfolding. The first one with Out of the Way, that series was later showed to a convention of highway patrolmen, Kansas Highway Patrol. It was used as some evidence with some law changes. In Kansas, when formula for allocations to way stations versus mobile way stations was changed. So maybe made a difference.
That's cool. I don't even think about that. A viewer watching it at home, but the applications outside of just keeping people informed,
Yeah, State Senator Jim Barone had contacted me after that and invited me to have lunch at his house so we could discuss it. And it was a time he thought he might ask me to testify before the Senate committee hearing looking into that.
Really?
We didn't, but it did lead to legislation.
Yeah. Wow.
So lots of I've done with law officers.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm thinking.
I've done ride-alongs with law officers. I did one, this is a few years ago. A law officer in Joplin was shot and injured, survived, as they were investigating some drug trafficking at a motel. Some of these motels have a problem with people who will set up drug labs, or they would sell drugs out of the motel because it's safer for them than doing it at their home.
Oh, yeah.
And we did a multi-part report where first of all, we looked at the stats, we looked at the problem, we looked at the danger to law officers and others, and talked to people at one motel who had witnessed this drug raid across the street at this motel. As we were talking to them, by the way.
Oh, my gosh.
As we were talking to them, somebody came down and complained about pot smoke coming out of one of the rooms. We stopped, we kept shooting, and they went to investigate this. But we also did a ride-along with an officer. And it was really interesting. And I'd done ride-alongs for other things, DUI investigations. But you really have an appreciation for the danger these guys put themselves in by necessity, and the sorts of things that they were looking for. That might be an indication that was some drug trafficking was going on. And drug trafficking would often be linked with thefts, and the thefts would be linked with violence. So it was this kind of this escalating problem that would start maybe small. And I did a report on that we called Checking In.
How long do those kind of, well, I guess it could be a question for any of your investigative, like how long do you plan on investigating the matter before kind of compiling
There's
it all?
Generally, we come up with the idea some weeks before the story is to air to give us what time is required.
Yeah.
And it depends. In some cases, it may be a few days. In some cases, it may be a few weeks. If you're requesting court documents through the Freedom of Information Act, it may be some time before you get those. So you have to allow for that.
That makes sense. And then you basically, because like some of these, you're working with officers, or the checking in one, you're working with motels and stuff. How far do you run it up the chain, I guess? Do you just keep trying to talk to hire people in charge, or do you just
if appropriate?
Yeah.
Sure. I mean, within the department, maybe within the legislative body or a governing body of some sort. Yeah. And down the chain too. You talk to the offenders if you can. So,
yeah.
So yeah. I remember one report, and a lot of them we do in cooperation with the police department. I'd done some looking at the sale of alcohol and tobacco to minors, for example. And to do this, we contacted the police department and said, we don't want to be breaking any laws. We contacted the prosecutor. We don't want anybody else to be breaking any laws, but here's what we want to do. We want to send some teenagers into some convenience stores, randomly picked in Joplin, and just see how easy it is for them to buy products that they're not supposed to legally buy. And they said, yes, we can do that.
Without persecution.
Yes. In fact, we were told that for them to simply buy wasn't against the law. For someone to sell would be. I said, well, what if we're telling them to buy? It's good. You're covered.
Okay.
So we contacted Joplin High School. We said, we don't want to pick the teenagers. You pick the teenagers. Here's what we want to do. And they gave us several. And I had a camera in an unmarked van outside. My wife went into these convenience stores with a hidden camera in a purse with a hole inside.
And what year was this?
Gosh, I don't know. This would have been maybe early 2000s.
Okay, so
maybe late 1990s.
Far along, but
yeah, but
not...
right.
But creative.
You don't have the cell phones.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it was in microphone, and we documented all these, and we highlighted all of the places that followed the rules. We didn't talk about. We gave the numbers for the ones that didn't, and it was about half. But because we had chosen them randomly, we thought it would be unfair to single them out.
That makes sense.
The problem was larger than those few. Done some investigative reports that just require lots and lots of paperwork and digging, and one of them. It was called Lost Legacy. It was this woman in Carthage, her name Judith Wright Patterson. And she had been adopted, and as her adoptive mother was dying near death, she was contacted by her birth mother. She was a teenager at this point. She'd been adopted, was born in the 1950s or something. And her birth mother told her this amazing story about her birth father having been an oil executive back in the 1950s. It was from an affair. And She had given her up for adoption, and she tracked down this guy who kind of confirmed the story. And
That she was, or that he was
that
her
he was the father.
Okay.
And this is by her account, at any rate. And by what documents we could find, it appeared to be true. And she had learned that this man had been sending the family, the birth family, support money and maybe deeds and leases over a period of many years.
Oh, wow.
But never got to Judith's family because he didn't know that she had been adopted. And the mother, when we tracked her down, sometimes she wouldn't answer the phone, but sometimes you knock on a door and you get an answer, and we did. And she confirmed a lot of the story, but she says that all of that wealth, all of those leases had been diverted by others, and it became this family struggle. And with the death of her birth father, struggle over the will that is still in litigation now.
Are you
in
serious?
A civil suit. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, that was called Lost Legacy. And
I feel like that's one where it's like you have this story in mind, and then the real story begins.
Yeah, you just keep peeling back layers of the onion, and it never seems to stop.
Is
But
that
it was
one-
fascinating for me.
Oh, I can imagine. Yeah.
Yeah.
Did she approach you guys, and she was like, "Hey, I need help," or
I
how
believe
did you even
so.
find that?
And honestly, I don't remember the genesis of that story, but I think that's how it was.
Yeah.
Someone had approached us with that, and I think it was Judith.
Is it kind of a mix between stories that just kind of happen or stuff that you guys like seek out?
Yes. I'll tell you about one that I sought out. This was one that we called Joplin's illegal question.
Separate from the minors, the illegal.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, this is completely separate. We promoted this heavily, and we both on air and through print media, that we were going to have this series, and it was about a question that it's illegal to ask in Joplin. And if you ask this question, you are breaking the law. But we didn't tell what it was. And then in part one of this series, we started like in a singles bar. You see people dancing and drinking and flirting. And we tell what the illegal question is. It's an old ordinance, apparently, on the Joplin books. Basically, what was illegal was any invitation for sex. It was the question, basically, want to have sex. But it's illegal in Joplin. and it has nothing to do with age of consent. It has nothing to do with prostitution, exchange of payment, or public sex or anything like that. It is simply the suggestion. And we talked to people coming out of the bar and in the bar and say, "Hey, did you know this was against the law?" And groups of young people would say, "Oh my gosh, this guy, he broke the law 3 times." And this woman says, "Yeah, I broke it twice myself." And we talked to some married couples. It was illegal even if you were married couples. We'd
so
have video
weird.
of people, on at their anniversary dinner. But it was against the law even if it was just whispered between 2 consenting adults. That was part one.
Yeah.
But we ended part one saying, yeah, it's kind of a joke. Surely this isn't really enforced. But we ended it by saying, no, it is enforced. People are actually being prosecuted under this law.
At the time of you.
Yes. And we said, and we'll tell you about that in part 2 tonight at 10. In part 2, we explained that although this law was being used to actually prosecute people, as far as we could determine, it was only being used to prosecute gay people.
Oh, no.
And again, because you asked about how I came up with the idea for the law. I came up for the story. I came up with the idea because we were seeing reports in the local newspaper about people being arrested for sex crime, some obscure sex crime. And it would be sometimes maybe a prominent businessman in a neighboring community who was arrested in Joplin at a park for some sex crime. And I remember there's some discussion in the newsroom. Is this a story? Is this a story? I say, well, what is the crime? What is the crime?
Yeah.
What is the crime? Is there a juvenile? Is it is no decent exposure? No. And as I looked into it, that was the crime. It was an invitation to sex. And what police were doing is they were setting up undercover stings, like in a particular park where, you'd sit on a bench, a guy would, maybe another guy would flirt. but and I went to the, but nobody was challenging this law. I think people who were being arrested under this law, they wanted it to go away, and they would just settle. They didn't want their names in the paper.
Exactly.
And I talked to a police investigator about this. I said, everybody who's been prosecuted under this law is prosecuted because they're gay. And he said, no. We set up this sting operation, and that's who happened to catch. I said, yeah, but you're doing the sting operation only at places where you know this is happening with gay people. I said, have you ever sent an undercover officer, male or female, into, say, this singles bar or over to the neighboring picnic and to see if maybe heterosexuals also are flirting in this way? He said, we never caught anybody doing that. I said, but you've never tried. He said, that's correct. And after that story aired, sometime later, a Joplin Globe reporter, he told me, he said, now that was, I think, the best local TV news story I'd ever said. And I joked with him. I said, thanks for the compliment. I noticed you qualified it by saying TV news. I'm sure he thought that some of the print journalism stories were better, but at least at that point, to my knowledge, they stopped arresting people for that specific crime, and we never saw it in newspapers again.
Wow. Well, I mean, that's great, but like, it's interesting too to see how just all it needs to do is get a little light shown on it, and then hopefully that's that. Yeah. That's insane.
Did a story about illegal trash dumping in the roads of Newton County. And went through some trash dumps with a guy who investigated this sort of thing. Even though recycling and legal places were available, there were huge piles dumping up. And the Highway Patrol set up a hidden camera, and we saw some of the people who were dumping trash, dumping an air conditioner where they busted open with a hammer, and you see the Freon spray out. And one of the hidden camera videos, we saw people throwing out these trash bags, and after they leave, one of the trash bags is moving a little bit, and eventually out crawls a puppy, and then a bunch of others.
Oh, that breaks my heart.
Yeah.
Oh gosh.
A dozen more. I know we don't have time to talk about them all.
Yeah, I was thinking, we'll probably take a quick break. And then there's one I know that we want to talk about, hidden homeless, which was five. Was it 5 in total?
It was actually it was only 3. Well, there were 3 and then a follow-up, so it was 4 in total. Okay,
4 in total.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to talk about that. We're going to take a quick break. Have to thank our sponsors, CDL Electric and Grand Lake Casino. And we're hanging out at JB's. We'll be right back.
This podcast is brought to you by Grand Lake Casino. Enjoy the best gaming in the tri-state area. Visit grandlakecasino.com for current promotions and entertainment. Grand Lake Casino, where friends play. Highway 10 north of Grove, Oklahoma.
Welcome back. Again, hanging out at JB's downtown. Just another reminder, they have their open house this Sunday from 7 p.m. to 11 p.m. So I should say Sunday from this record date. So whatever date that would be, the 10th?
This is the 6th. Well, I don't know. I don't know when this drops.
It's so hard whenever the days are, whatever days it's being uploaded. Anywho, make sure to check them out on Facebook, JB's Downtown. They'll have more information. You can learn all about them. But we're talking about investigative reports. And now this is one that was pretty involved, and I have questions. It was hidden homeless.
Right.
So we said it's kind of around mid-90s.
Yeah, mid to late 90s. I guess.
How do you even, because it's a very visible issue, people see it, but how do you even, I guess you ask yourself, where do you begin? Trying to take this on.
We were aware, obviously, that there's a homelessness problem in Joplin, but it had often been told, I think, from the perspective of officials, and not often enough from the perspective of the homeless, in my view. And that's what I wanted. And I thought the way to tell this story would be to spend a day and a night with the homeless. And in preparation for this, first of all, I didn't shave for a couple of days, for a few days. And I put on some old clothes, layers of old clothes because it was cold. And
What time did you do?
this was January, and
Wow.
it was cold. There was snow on the ground. It was temperature in the teens.
Oh gosh.
And I had decided, I kind of made some rules for myself that I wasn't going to have access to anything that a homeless person wouldn't have access to in the way of food or shelter or transportation for about 24 hours. And this was going to be a way to kind of get to know a few people. And I had told the news director, I said, look, if you send a photographer with me, I'm going to find lots of stories. Just trust me on this. It'll be a series. It started when I went to see the Salvation Army in the afternoon for what was going to be the first and last meal of the day. It was one meal, a free meal. And I introduced myself to a number of people at this community shelter, homeless people, and they explained what I was doing. I said, and I'm going to be out tonight. And I'd like to talk to people, as many of you as I can. I was kind of getting to know their stories and getting them comfortable with me. I told everybody I don't have any money with me. I wanted that word to get around.
Yeah, I mean, that's just smart. I mean,
just
you never know.
Yeah. And some of them said, yeah, maybe we'll talk to you. Maybe we'll show you our camp. Maybe we'll show you our secret hideaway. Mm-hmm. We'll see. And as I left there, I was taken to one makeshift camp that was made out of a tarp where a man and woman were staying. A guy was taking some soup to his sick friend there. Her name was Mary. I got to meet her. And through the course of the evening, at one point we went to Souls Harbor, which was at that point the only real shelter for the homeless. We met a family there, a family of four, two young kids. One was 3 and one was an infant, who were recently homeless. And they had some of the better quarters.
Yeah.
But we learned about some of the rules there and why some people couldn't stay there. And there comes a point if you've been drinking, there are different rules. And substance abuse is a big problem in the homeless community. It's why a lot of people are homeless. But through the course of the evening, we just documented where we were and what time it was. And we would meet different people. And one guy who took us to his makeshift cabin that he had created out of railroad ties and tarp. And another guy who was kind of a self-proclaimed street preacher. He took us to his hidden campsite near Ozark Christian College. He liked to be there, Ozark Bible College. He liked to be there because he would go there in the library to study during the day. And he said he was a Christian and the guy that he worshiped was homeless. And it felt fitting to him that he didn't have worldly possessions.
Yeah.
I remember he heated up a couple of coffee cans of water over a campfire. And one of them was to make coffee, and the other one that he would pour into a water bottle that he would then put into his tent to keep him warm through the night.
Oh, wow. That's a great idea.
We visited some places, went to a bar that stayed open late in the night, providing shelter for homeless till about 1 o'clock, and talked to the owner there who was going to be getting up the next morning to make free coffee for the homeless. And I said, why do you do this? And to him, it wasn't a complicated question. He did it because people needed it.
Yeah.
It was as simple as that. Went to found places where people try to hang out while they can, all-night laundries, the bus station, but police patrol those. They look for loiterers. So you only have a limited time there. We found a teenager who had been a runaway. He was at the bus station, was making his way back home to Branson because he had had enough. It was cold. Found one guy who had been at Souls Harbor and was no longer allowed to stay there because he had found a job. And they determined he was no longer eligible. He was a janitor at the North Park Mall, and he was walking. He had been walking from his job to the at the mall to a church that sometimes provided shelter, but he had to beat a deadline, and he had gone there earlier, and they said, no, we need, first of all, proof that you don't have a criminal record. So he had walked then to the police station to get back, and when he was walking then back to the church, and he wasn't sure he would get there in time. And I don't remember what the cutoff time was, 9 o'clock, I think, and he had gotten there. It was just after 9, and they said, nope, you can't get in. You can't get in. And we went to the door. This guy, he just missed the deadline.
Yeah.
And they made an exception for him, but they didn't make an exception for another guy who was lying on the steps of this church, these concrete steps, because he was drunk. He was clearly drunk.
Mm-hmm.
He was disabled. He had one leg, and he was soaking wet. And they don't allow anybody in who's been drinking. Understandable.
Yeah.
It's for the safety of everybody. So this guy's going to die tonight if we don't do something. And he said, we've called the police. Police aren't doing anything. And they had other things.
Yeah.
I don't know if that was true, but so in this case, we couldn't just let this happen. And generally, as a reporter, you're an observer, but sometimes you have to do something. As we called the police, we said, this man, the temperature is in the teens. This man is going to die. The guy wasn't sure he wanted us to call the police. He was out of it. I said to him, you don't want to die, do you? And he looked at me and he says, look in my eyes. There's dead in them already. It was
that's chilling.
soundbite. It was chilling. Police came. They took him. He was the last one that got shelter that night. And then through the rest of the night, at 1, 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning, we'd visit different places. People had told us, a Vietnam veteran told us that he was at this abandoned warehouse. He was staying illegally. And he did this whole entrance. He told us that we might be able to get in. We could knock, and he was skeptical. He didn't want the police. But he had let us in. We also knew that a lot of abandoned houses in the crawl space had people staying. Police had told us specifically. They knew we were doing this. They said, "Don't go in there. It's too dangerous."
And
even
the crawl
homeless
spaces,
right? Because you don't want to surprise people. And not long before this, one homeless person had been killed by another homeless person allegedly with an ice pick, and because they were surprised.
Yeah, just caught off guard.
Yeah.
And it's a very vulnerable. That's the thing that surprises me most with this kind of series is they do kind of have to be vulnerable. Like, this is where I hit lay my head.
They have to, right, and they have to trust you to some extent.
Yeah.
And with this last one in this warehouse, he was purported to be, and I believe him, he was. Had been a Vietnam vet.
Mm-hmm.
He'd been in the technology industry. He was from Minnesota. He had some bad luck, and he didn't have any options. And I remember that was our last stop for the night, and it was a couple of more hours before dawn, and we weren't going to stop until dawn. And so we stayed with him, and 90 minutes or so until the sun was up, and by then. He started a little fire in a little coffee can. And the reason that he had to do that was because he had to thaw out his shoes, which were frozen solid.
Oh, gosh.
Solid as a brick. And then we said goodbye to him and we went on, and the sun was coming up. And we pointed it out that for us, this was the end of one long, difficult, cold night, but for all of these people we met, it was just one more beginning to one more day.
That's just another day for them.
Right.
And it seems like usually there's not much transportation. I mean, obviously there's some forms of public transportation, but very mobile. I feel like because you were naming a lot of different places
and I was walking. My photographer was driving, but I said, I'm not going to. I'm not getting in a warm car, and if I can't walk there, I'm not going there. So yeah, I covered a lot of miles that night. But
wow.
But you can travel from South Main to North Main in 45 minutes, an hour, and you meet people. I meet people who along the way would stop and pick up the cigarette butts and put them in their pocket to smoke later.
Yeah.
And that's how you kind of, the word had gotten around that I was doing this. I looked the part, and I think people just allowed me to tell their stories.
And one meal really in that 24 hours.
Yeah, I mean that was not a big deal.
Yeah.
Really. I mean, because these other people,
They're going even
that was their
longer.
existence.
Yeah.
Right. I did a follow up on that story. Maybe 6 months later, maybe it was a year and a half later. I don't remember. It was in the summer. What I tried to then find as many of those as we can and to do a follow up on their story. Some had found jobs, had found shelter. Some we couldn't find. Some we knew had moved on. And the one-legged guy had gotten into a motel. The janitor at the church, he had gotten a job in Arkansas and had a couple of 3 roommates. The family, by the way, that we had profiled in Souls Harbor, someone had seen that story. The family, the guy had said, God will provide. Well, someone saw that story and they said, you know what, I can provide a home. And they provided a home where they could stay for 6 months, I think for $100 a month until they could get on their feet. And then subsequently made that home available to other homeless people for limited times at cheap rates, just so they could get on their feet. And they're cycling through there.
That's so awesome. And that stability, I mean, that's everything, Mm-hmm. Did you see a lot of people, or did you talk with people who weren't from this? Because you said they kind of moved. Some you couldn't find. They probably moved on.
Some were passing through. Some had been in and around the area for some time.
Really?
Yeah. Some places I think homeless people maybe gravitate to because the weather works, or maybe there are services that are available to help them out when other communities are not. Certainly communities much smaller than Joplin, you're going to have fewer options. Joplin, since then has opened watered gardens, which is helping the homeless, and there are more resources to try to give people a second chance and get on their feet.
That's kind of what I was thinking of whenever this was actually, investigated and recorded. There wasn't a lot of, like I said, Salvation Army and Souls Harbor, a couple options, but... And
we called it the hidden homeless for a reason. I think the problem was kind of hidden from sight. I'm not sure people were fully aware that there was a homelessness problem in Joplin, or at least the extent of it.
Yeah, it can be kind of the elephant in the room. And like you said, for someone who spends their whole day in the library, that's a great resource just to, stay warm and learn and things like that. But someone could see somebody in the library and have no idea that they don't have anywhere to go once the library closes.
Exactly.
Wow. That is, and those are the ones I think are really interesting to see, is just really, and I think a couple episodes back we talked about how, perception is your perspective, I should say, is everything. And to have that unique perspective for a mass audience, I think is so cool.
Yes, because everybody has their own unique perspective. Mm-hmm. And even talk about the perspective of the homeless, but that isn't one perspective. It's the perspective of each individual. People got there through different circumstances and for different reasons. And they were going to work their way out, or maybe not, by different means. And I think it's eye-opening to just see people that way, in ways that you can identify them as not the other. It's just another potential
part of yourself.
And if circumstances have been different for any one of us, I think it's easy to see that maybe we or someone we know could have ended up in the same position. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I think we'll wrap it up there for investigative reports. Thank you as well. We only have one episode left. One more. We're going to get that wrapped up. We'll be doing it here at JB's downtown on Main Street in Joplin. Obviously, again, check out their Facebook page. This coming Sunday, they'll have Randall Shreve, and their open house is 7 p.m. to 11 p.m. And then a huge thanks to our other partnering sponsors, CDL Electric and Grand Lake Casino. And we will catch you in the next episode.
I chose to invest money into a renewable energy resource like solar panels, so that I can sleep at night knowing that I am doing my part to create a cleaner earth for my grandchildren. CDL made that decision easier by educating me on how I can save money and how renewable energy can save the environment. Because what I do today matters tomorrow. Call CDL today to see how you can make a difference.
Thank you for listening to KOAM Presents. For the latest content and local news, weather, and sports, please go to koamnewsnow.com.